Have you ever looked at a really successful company and just wondered, how do they do it? What's the secret sauce? Well, it's usually not some big, flashy product. More often than not, there's a kind of hidden blueprint at work, a set of guiding ideas that shapes every single decision. Today, we're going to unpack that blueprint and get to the core principles of management. All right, let's start things off with a little bit of a puzzle. What could the ancient Egyptian pyramids possibly have in common with a modern car giant like Toyota? I know, it sounds a little out there, right? But the answer, believe it or not, is management. Just think about the sheer coordination, the planning, the people power it took to build those pyramids. It points to these timeless truths about how we organize people to do incredible things. So, to see how these ancient ideas are still working today, let's fast forward a few thousand years and look at a modern giant. Toyota's success around the world is no accident. It is absolutely built on a very specific and deliberate foundation. So what is the secret? I mean, how did they become such a powerhouse? You might think it's some top secret formula locked away in a vault, but really, the answer is kind of hiding in plain sight. It's something they publish for anyone to see. It all comes down to their guiding principles. And notice, these aren't super specific instructions about how to build a car engine. They're broad, almost philosophical ideas, like foster a culture of creativity and teamwork. These principles act like a compass for the entire company, guiding everybody from the CEO right down to the person on the assembly line. And that really brings us to the core of what we're talking about today. When we say management principles, what do we actually mean? It's really important to get this right because they are not rigid rules that you just follow blindly from a textbook. At its heart, a management principle is just a broad and general guideline for making decisions. And that word, guideline, is so important. These aren't like the laws of physics. Think of them more like a coach's philosophy for the team rather than a referee's strict rule book. You know, this chart is a great way to see what principles aren't. So they're not techniques. Those are specific step-by-step procedures, how to do something. And they're not quite values either, which are more about our moral beliefs. Principles are different. They're formed by watching what actually works in real-world situations, which makes them these practical truths about how organizations work best. So what is it that gives these principles their power? Let's break down their key characteristics. You can almost think of it as their DNA. First off, they're universal. The idea of, say, dividing up work to be more efficient isn't just for a giant car factory. That same idea works just as well in a hospital, a school, or even a tiny little startup. The setting changes, but the core principle is the same. Second, they're flexible, and this is a big one. The real world is messy, it's complicated, it's always changing. A good manager needs the freedom to take a principle and adapt it, tweak it to fit the specific challenge that's right in front of them. Third, they're fundamentally about people. At the end of the day, that's what management is all about, right? Influencing human behavior. So these principles are designed to help us work together more effectively, to collaborate better, and just get more done as a team. And finally, they're contingent. Now that's a bit of a fancy word, but all it means is that their application depends entirely on the situation. So a principle of strong top-down leadership might be perfect in a crisis, but a more collaborative, open approach is way better when you're trying to brainstorm new ideas. Context is everything. Okay, so that's the theory, but let's be real. Why does any of this actually matter? If you're a busy manager or you're hoping to be one someday, what's the actual real-world payoff of all this? Well, the impact is huge. For starters, they give managers real insights into what's going on, which helps them make smarter, more objective decisions. They also lead to way better use of resources, less waste, and they help the entire organization adapt to change. And really, they're the foundation for how we train and develop the next generation of great leaders. Here's maybe the best way to think about it. Principles help you see cause and effect. So instead of just trying random things and hoping for the best, which is just incredibly wasteful, managers can actually act with a purpose. They have a playbook because they can better predict the outcomes of their decisions. It's about working smarter, not just harder. To really appreciate where these ideas came from, we've got to jump in a time machine. Let's go all the way back to the noise and the steam of the Industrial Revolution and meet one of the very first people to think about management as a science. You see, this hunt for a better way to manage is ancient. I mean, we started this whole thing talking about pyramids. But a massive leap forward happened around the early 1900s with something called classical management theory. And that's where our story really kicks into high gear. This whole idea was championed by a man named Frederick Winslow Taylor. His mission was simple, but it was absolutely revolutionary for his time. He wanted to find the one best way to do any given job. He was totally convinced that work wasn't some mysterious art. It was a science that you could study, measure, and perfect. Now, Taylor wasn't some academic living in an ivory tower. No way. This guy was a mechanical engineer who started his career right on the factory floor. He was a hands-on problem solver who was just obsessed with efficiency. He'd look at the chaos and all the wasted effort in the factories and just think, come on, there has got to be a better way. So his solution was a set of 4 core principles that honestly changed everything. First, he said, stop using old rules of thumb and actually develop a science for every single job. Second, scientifically select and train workers for the roles they're best suited for. Third, you gotta have real cooperation between the managers and the workers. And fourth, clearly divide the work. Management's job is to plan and optimize, and the worker's job is to execute that plan perfectly. This was a radical idea for the disorganized factories of his day. And that leaves us with a huge critical question for today. Taylor's world was all about standardized, repeatable tasks in factories. But what about our world? A world that runs on innovation, creativity, and constant change. In a world like this, can there really still be a one best way to manage? Or have the principles themselves had to evolve into something far more adaptable and far more human? That's definitely something to think about.